Harry Littman, we have a Supreme Court justice who is sharply rebuking the Trump regime in public and their tactics in public. Doesn't mention him by name, but Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, this big event in Puerto Rico, said, we as judges need to stand up against threats and intimidation tactics. To me, this isn't about judges appointed by Biden or Obama or Clinton. We're seeing similar messaging come out of judges appointed by Trump and Reagan and George W. Bush as well. And it seems that each and every day, the Trump regime gives the middle finger to judges. Let me start with that, and then I want to move on to what Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said. And I'll give you an example. There was that bizarre cabinet meeting that was held this week in the Trump regime, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio was asked a very basic question. Can you give us an update about Abrego Garcia? And he responds, I'm not going to give it to you. Okay, well, you could answer that way. It's odd way to behave than kind of like being a dick. But then he goes, and you know who else I'm not going to give it to? Judges. Judges will never get the information ever. Yeah. And again, he's talking to, there are Trump appointed judges who have made orders like this. Now watch what Rubio says. And he says it next to Trump. They all feel like this is like their tough guy act. Here, watch this.
Yes,
would be fine. Yes.
Secretary Rubio, can I ask you a question? You brought up El Salvador in your remarks. Have you been in touch with El Salvador about returning Abrego Garcia? Has a formal request from this administration been made?
Well, I would never tell you that. And you know who else I'll never tell? A judge. Because the conduct of our foreign policy belongs to the President of the United States and the executive branch, not some judge. So we will conduct foreign policy appropriately if we need to. But I'll never discuss it. And no one will ever make us discuss it because that's how foreign policy works.
Mr.
You know, his family fled the Castro regime in Cuba. Yeah. You know, he rose to prominence as, you know, as a family that stood up to the Castro regime. And let's just be real. Like a statement like that, I will never tell judges, we do what we want to do. You know, like I don't have a family that's, you know, fled the Castro regime, you know, although I have ancestors that go back who had to move out based on anti-Semitism in Europe at various different times. But just the idea that you have people that you sound like, do you know what you just said? And the fact, Harry, that it doesn't even get that much attention that like that was said. That's why I want to highlight that clip a lot. So in Puerto Rico, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson from the Supreme Court, she made the following statement about the attacks on judges, not Democrat judges, Republican in general. These attacks are not random, she says. They seem designed to intimidate those of us who serve in this critical capacity. She told a judges conference in Puerto Rico, the threats and harassment are attacks on our democracy, on our system of government, and they ultimately risk undermining our Constitution and the rule of law. She urged her judicial colleagues to show raw courage to dispense justice without fear or favor. Quote, I urge you to keep going. Keep doing what is right for our country, and I do believe that history will vindicate your service. She spoke for about 18 minutes in total. Very different than what you and I were talking about 2 years ago when Justice Alito would go to Italy and he would mock our democracy there. I mean, she's talking about fundamental issues about judges having their lives threatened right now. So, Harry, unusual for a judge to talk like this in a conference like this or not? What do you make of it? Is she sending a message to the rest of the bench here? What's going on?
You bet it's unusual, but we are in unusual times. We can start with Rubio, who really has gone full on Trump. That's how foreign policy works. Yeah, the question is, how does constitutional adjudication work? What happens when you found actual, and now with the latest ruling by the Trump judge in the Southern District of Texas, Ben, you've actually got not merely a holding that says people have a right to argue their constitutional possible violations. But in actual, everybody down there in CCOT in El Salvador is down there unlawfully because it's based on this interpretation, this crazy interpretation they came up with, a sort of, in Stephen Miller's kind of, hothouse, that really doesn't fly. So that's a serious matter, and foreign policy maybe as well, though he's really trivializing everything else. But the answer is, and the Supreme Court has made this clear, something in between. I will never tell anyone, that's not what the law is. And he's definitely cruising for bruising or cruising for all of us to have a constitutional crisis. Now, Jackson, this is one of those conferences where she's the circuit justice, and I think she's directing this not simply to the other 8 justices. So that's part of what's been going on. And Roberts in particular is trying to make them speak as much as he can with one voice. But look what's happened to the district courts, and they really have responded very well. Jeb Boasberg, who's got had the first case involving the aliens, not just him, his daughter has gotten the Domino's pizza treatment from we don't know who. Lone wolves were, that are MAGAites. You've had 7 sitting senators call for his impeachment. Why? They couldn't begin to say, except they think somehow that his rulings must be wrong because they're against Trump. It is dangerous times out there for judges, and they are more and more now. We now have 4 different judges with this issue of, has he misinterpreted the Alien and Enemies Act? Little hint there, yes, he has. But each of them is worried. Boasberg, big guy, very calm guy, has a security detail 24 hours that, totally screws with his life. And we have many judges like that. So it's in part the Rubios of the world, but it's also just this whole nasty kind of, almost brown shirt crew of people who stand ready to, as far as judges know, to take them out when they walk to lunch. And so that is an unusual, and for no reason at all. Nobody understands at all what their important role is. So that is some really crazy times for, people in robes who never contemplated it. And they have, by and large, come through and been strong. And that's, I think, the first message that Jackson wanted to give. And then, of course, also, yes, she is saying, look, we're getting all these emergencies up here. We 9 have to really stand strong if the country is going to abide. And you wouldn't normally be making that point at a circuit conference that is going to show up in the New York Times the next day. But as I started with, these are not usual times.
Look, you've got a Trump-appointed federal judge in Maryland in another case involving a 20-year-old Venezuelan man issuing an order similar to the Abrego Garcia order,
right,
facilitate the return Trump regime. A far more wide-reaching order in the Southern District of Texas, a Trump-appointed Judge Rodriguez says, I'm not even just addressing one specific person. Your entire invocation of the Alien Enemies Act is unconstitutional. I mean, you're not using the Alien Enemies Act the way it was intended. You're claiming Tren de Aragua is a foreign country that's involved in a war to claim war powers to then take individuals off the street without due process and put them in concentration camps. And the judge took a very principled and very definitive stance and said, went further than even the non-Trump appointed judge, and even said, even if you were to tell me these people are Tren de Aragua, even if they were, you can't use Alien Enemies Act for that, which is a bold decision to make, especially for a Trump appointed judge. He goes, because look at the statute. It talks about a war with a country, and you claiming there's a hybrid war with Venezuela it's not happening. So the judge made, that ruling. I mean, some of these other judges are taking the step below that, which is saying you're not giving people due process. You have to fundamentally give him a modicum of due process and don't get to that next question even of, whoa, is this whole Alien Enemies Act thing invalid? And this is what we see with Trump. War powers in order to do this failed immigration policy, claiming that there's, war powers for his tariff policy to tariff the world, that there's, emergency war almost with Canada and Australia.
Law firms. Oh, it's a national security risk that Perkins Coie, right?
Law firms, these law firms that have been around for a long time, where top law students graduate. I did interviews with them, that they're basically terrorist agents in cells. So I need to shut the law firms down. And you go through each of his issues. When Donald Trump said that he was going to be a dictator on day one, this is how he's doing it. And now we have to have this legal system that has to hold. And the stress test now on it is the choose your own adventure novel that we never wanted to choose after the 2020 elections. It's like, what would have happened if he stayed this, and so will we survive? I think, there's a lot of great legal groups, a lot of great lawyers, justices standing up. So I feel confident. We can't take any day for granted, Harry. And I think we're going to. I am impressed at the durability of our legal system under all of this assault. Trump and Musk thought they'd break this by, they thought this is a nightmare for them because they thought they'd break us. They'd break everything. I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, well, and I'll just say another big thing I think is popular opposition. He's really sinking fast. And it's one thing after you've already captured all the levers of government, say in Hungary or Russia, to try to squelch dissent. But he's now got to get over to there from a position of real weakness. The biggest poll number that really grabbed my attention and coincident with the 100-day retrospectives, where 85% of this country say if he gets an order from the courts, he has to obey it. The MAGA and everything, 85%, nothing really says it. But you've really put your finger, I think, on the crisis that is coming, because you do have a legal system that is set up. I mean, if you took a step back and, ask, what should a government do when it has unlawfully sent all these folks down for a living nightmare in a gulag, possibly to die there? It would get, everybody sort of rowing as one to get them back. But you have an administration that not only doesn't want to, but is ready to lie about it. And so what's really coming in the Supreme Court, I fear. I overall feel sanguine as well, but what is the worrisome point for the Supreme Court is there's law out there that says you got to assume executives acting in good faith. You got to assume when they tell you they've tried hard that they have. And, this administration will say that and won't, well, look, I don't want to mince words. We'll be lying about it. And how does the court and the courts overall handle that? That makes me tangibly nervous for the legal system. Nevertheless, I totally agree. The legal system's, really hung in there well. And I think it really matters. Popular opposition is growing. His numbers are plummeting. It's already down below any number of a president at this stage in his tenure. And, that I think is something that he won't be able ultimately to overcome. But in the meantime, man, is he taking a wrecking ball to the government and to big sectors of civil society like law firms, as you say.
Look, as federal spending is higher now than it was under former President Biden, right, and government is way less efficient, secretly the government now has to hire back the people that it fired, and they want to cover this up because they can't run things like the FAA, and there's no air traffic controllers. And so they're now rushing back to the people they fired. Things are less efficient. Look, Trump made an entire failed business career out of not following contracts and using what's called an implied good faith, implied covenant of good faith in contracts to not follow through with the contracts. That was Trump's life.
Great
So
point.
the ultimate contract that we have that has implied good faith is the Constitution. When I teach constitutional law at law school, the students are always shocked that some of these amendments are like one sentence. Like, whoa, all of this is based on one sentence. I'm like, yeah, it's based on a good faith belief that we all understand what this means. But what happens when a bad faith actor abuses the good faith imbued in it, and they're the executive branch, which our founders just assume these, they would say gentlemanly, now gentlewoman, gentleman, gentlepersonly, but they assume that they'll be, oh, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this. Should we have some tea? And that's not the situation we have. Harry is at the Talking Feds YouTube, the Talking Feds podcast, and the Talking Feds Substack. Make sure you subscribe to all three of them. It's where I get my legal news from. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.